We could also just go with no slides, like Nick did, and I'll read from my slides.
I think, you know, that might be better because it's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
So if there's any specific ones you want to me to bring up, then just prompt me and I'll bring them up.
Oh, it will be the value chain. When we reach value chain, it's just those value chain diagrams, those 2 value chain diagrams.
All right, so slide 6 and 7.
Yeah.
All right.
You can also project 6, 7, and 8, maybe.
Okay. I'll just see what I can do.
Okay. Coolio.
All right. Karen, are we ready to go live?
Do I look fine?
You look gorgeous.
Danke.
All right, so you know the way. Sorry. So Jenna's going to watch the Facebook live feed and put any questions that come up into the feed.
Okay.
The chat feed on the. Can you see the chat?
Yeah.
If it's tricky, I'm going to be watching the chat from outside, and I'm going to be in the talk with you. So if there's anything that you miss, I'll pick it up and pitch the question to you.
Okay.
All right, I'll hit go live now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's animation essay talk. This week, we have been organizing a number of events for you to tune into, either online here on Facebook. We've been running workshops and we're having networking events to connect with you and to help you understand what Animation SA has been up to. We invite your questions and comments, if you can post them into the chat on the Facebook page. So today we are bringing you Isabelle Rorke. She's joining us for our conversation this afternoon. Isabelle has been with Animation SA for, how long has it been now, Isabelle?
Oh, wow. So Dewey and I were 2 of the founding members of Animation SA with a group of other beautiful beings. And I rejoined in 2018. Yeah.
Yeah, so Isabelle has been at the forefront of skills development in the animation sector, working specifically to accelerate transformation in our industry. She heads up the Human Capital and Innovation portfolio and is an owner of the Gamation company, which is a fantastic initiative to help bring South African original South African IP to market. So over to you, Isabelle.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with just a background and introduction on my journey to getting to here. Having started in animation in the year 2000, which is like a million years ago. And back then when I started my studio already, we identified many gaps in animation that were creating barriers to entry and most importantly, barriers to success. So we had to look at interventions to address some of that because we had to outsource our production to India. And that was very painful for us because it was the first African folktale series done in 3D, and it had to be outsourced to another country. So we designed the Animation Production Training Initiative to address the skills shortage in animation. Back when I started, I was maybe one of 3 women who owned animation studios, and very few Black people. So we trained about 40 interns, 13 writers in this APTI program. And I think there began my real love for the development of young people. I think there are 2 things I have a great passion for. It's young people and entrepreneurship. So, many years later, having run the studio and closed it down in 2010 in the last global economic crisis, when I came back into the industry, it was very much around looking at what are the barriers to entry and how do we start addressing that, and also addressing the business model, because there were lots of problems around the business model. So yeah, in re-entering the industry after taking time off to have two kids, I looked at joining Animation SA as the entry point to address some of the problems. One of the things I did was also consulting through my business to Molokong Digital Innovation Precinct to look at taking my internship to the next level. So one, putting it out more into industry as opposed to just in a studio, but also looking, I felt the time was more right for specialization, and made the decision to focus on concept art and storyboarding. And these 2 disciplines allowed for us to open the door to Africanization of imagery and animation to be addressed, which, is an ongoing issue. But as we were doing this in the studio, even though we, hired a Black animator from La Gobelins, Lesego Forster was the art director, and he said, the impact of colonization on artists and how they reflect their art is huge. And we discovered that we actually have to deal with decolonization of imagery before we can deal with Africanization of imagery. And it's not just Western influence, it's the influence of manga as well in that. So, Africanization of imagery is really important because it starts to define the African look. What is our aesthetic style? If you look at French animation, it's distinctly, clearly French. Disney, Pixar, manga, they all have a distinct style. So I think it becomes really important that we start to create platforms to address issues of, what is the African aesthetic and style. And this is going to come into developing more on things like concept art and storyboarding, but going much more deeper and having dialogues about it. What is the process of defining that? So in joining Animation SA in 2018, again, I decided to join the Skills Development and Transformation Unit, of which I looked at the name and immediately wanted to change it, or did change it, to Social Impact and Human Capital Innovation. Although now I think there's a case to be made for skills development to be a unit on its own, and social impact and human capital innovation to be a unit on its own. I think there's so much to be done that I think these 2 units can become their own. So the reason I changed it was because social impact, I think, is such an important thing to keep in mind when designing our programs and innovations. And innovation is one of those key things to keep top of mind in these changing and trying times. And so if they become the titles, the words in what we're doing, we keep them top of mind in everything that we're doing. So I started fundraising in 2018. And in 2019, I managed to get the GIZ to come on board as a funder, and started to look at what areas can we innovate on, what sort of issues are we dealing with that we could use some of the modern solution tools that are out there. And I've always really loved hackathons. I think they're just an amazing tool in just unpacking a problem and bringing a brain's trust together to solve it in a really fast, powerful way. So GIZ funded our hackathon. where we basically were looking at how do we address the gaps in IP protection. And back then, blockchain, I was really fascinated by blockchain, and I thought this is a really powerful tool that we could perhaps use. So we hacked that problem through and came up with a viable solution for animation, gaming, and music IP assets and the protection of them. So now the solution is out there. It just needs further funding to implement it. And later you'll see when I talk about licensing and merchandising, how this becomes a really key intervention. So one of the other interventions that we worked on, especially for the social impact, was an animarathon that we ran through the Fagogezi Festival. And this was looking at having social impact with inner city kids. I think they are forgotten a lot of the time because everybody wants to focus on townships, and they forget that inner city kids are also living in very dire situations and have very limited access to opportunities and so forth. So we brought in the youth from the Saibono Science Center, who are all self-taught. The center provides the machinery, the software, etc. And the kids go there after school and kind of who are interested in animation and gaming and so forth, and they play with it. So we had brought them in, and Melissa Horney's team did an amazing job with helping them fill the gaps in their knowledge. And the impact assessment showed just the powerful impact that this had for these young kids in terms of filling the gaps of things they didn't know what they could do, and now they were able to. So we definitely want to continue with that this year. So through the GIZ funding, we were also able to do road shows, and get feedback from our constituents across the country, from Joburg, Cape Town, KZN. And so now I think is the beginning of a new level of transformation and skills development, and really looking at how do we transform through skills development, training, and education. And I think the big focus is SMMEs and addressing their needs. SMMEs are the absolute be all and end all of our industry. Without them, we have nothing. And so, helping them to just reducing those high barriers to success is critical. So one of the things that I researched was incubators and the impact that incubators were having for the arts in various countries around the world. And the great thing about it is when you mix the different types of artistic disciplines and you create that kind of enabling environment for cross-pollination, for experimentation and innovation, and of course, cost savings and shared resources and peer learning. So they really are incredible spaces that we can allow for shifting and changing and learning on a really profound way. So I started putting together a strategy for an incubator. And initially it was with live action and music, and we were trying to get the different disciplines to kind of come together to create one big, massive incubator. But as you know, as things happen, and COVID also happened, and so I had to go ahead just pushing the animation component of it and going, let's just get one piece going, and the other piece hopefully will build it and they will come. So we've managed to get a great partnership together of different key stakeholders from Animation SA, the NFDF, Maxim Digital, the JCCI's, Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce, and the Gauteng Department of Economic Development. So this incubator is essentially going to implement a strategy I designed called the Road to Commercialization, which essentially is looking at opening the doors to TV series and investment. And by focusing on these two areas, we're sort of preparing SMMEs for scaling over a 3 to 5 year period. And that really allows a great platform to layer in the learning and the growth and the peer review and peer education. So there's a lot of exciting things I'd love to say about the incubator, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next area, which is also a very big passion of mine. And we can discuss the incubator later if anybody wants to go into that if we have time. But the value chain issue is a big passion of mine that I identified quite a while ago. And managed to get a great platform recently when Nick and I were invited to join the reference group for the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. And in that group, we're able to, along with other audiovisual members, we form part of different units that are sector support to fundraise funding, to skills development, transformation, and value chain. And so from that platform, I was able to present this sort of, I would say, reshuffle of the value chain. So if you look at if you Google the animation value chain online, you get the normal kind of concept creation, which is development, your pre-production, your production, your post-production, and your distribution. And I must make a separation between, I'm talking about the production value chain, not the overall value chain that includes the entire ecosystem. That's a completely different value chain system of which we're going to be working with, fortunately through GIZ as well as funding going forward, and looking at that from an industry level. So what I'm talking about here is the production value chain. And so what I've been proposing is that when you look at the old value chain, your marketing, your licensing and merchandising, your distribution are all at the end of the value chain. And it is way too late to incorporate that stuff. And it's misleading so many young people in thinking that, you know, they work through this value chain and then they start dealing with that at the end. And if we do that shift, we're then able to take everything from the end of the value chain and pull it up front. So what impact does that have? And I want to drill down into the development focus and what this change means. So, you know, on top of creating your Bible, your treatment, and your script, you're sitting with some key assets that you're able to play with. So what I'm proposing is that in development, we incorporate IP strategy design, because we have to move away from project to project income and start building brands. And brand building allows for us to exploit multiple ways of getting income and value from our brands. And then I also want to talk about target market. This I actually put in last minute. It wasn't in the initial presentation, because it's one of those undervalued and not given enough focus. And yet it is such a key component to the success of your process. Understanding your target market. This is something that needs to be studied and analyzed and put, like, especially in a country like ours. We have such diversity that target market becomes a key part, and it all starts to build into when you're designing your transmedia marketing campaign. I could go on for days with the importance of transmedia for video content and it as a particular marketing format for video content. But by designing your transmedia marketing strategy upfront within your development, you're able to engage with your audience and build audience throughout the value chain. So from the very beginning in that development phase, you're already starting to look at your assets. So now you look at asset planning. And in that process of asset planning, you're unearthing marketable and saleable gems within that asset list. So that asset planning then starts to filter into what is my marketing strategy and how do I start to play with that in that kind of marketing storyline that you're telling online. Then the other thing that is critical to incorporate into the development process is licensing and merchandising. This is one of the biggest potential returns on investment that you could get in animation. It's such a powerful way of touching your audiences beyond the screen. And, you know, when we start to talk about Africanization of imagery and animation, we start talking African toys, African games that kids can engage with. And this really starts to have a big impact. So by designing your licensing and merchandising strategy up front, you're preparing, you can even start earning an income from it from the beginning. And that also starts to impact on your design, because licensing and merchandising, designing for merchandising, designing your characters to be merchandisable becomes a key thing that the art directors need to take into consideration. What are the rules around that? that make it more friendlier for merchandise. So by bringing that up front in your development, you're making your brand more robust and making it more powerful in terms of being able to extract greater ROI. And then there's, of course, designing your distribution strategy. With the incredible growth of online and media in Africa, it's now a frontier that we can enter that we've never been able to access in the way that we can now. There's so many options that it becomes critical to design a distribution strategy. And I mean, there's some incredible companies in Africa who've designed technologies to address the payment issue. And so technology has solved some of those problems. So it becomes a whole new market that we're able to crack. So yeah, designing your distribution strategy becomes key. So all of this essentially is about building your business model and making a robust, strong business model, which gives you a great business plan. And essentially what you're doing is it's a risk mitigation strategy in order to improve your opportunities for ROI. And I think it's important to also mention that in this process, SWOT analysis also becomes critical, because, you know, people have done SWOT analysis and they just create their strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, and their threats. But when you're going through this process and you really drill down into your SWOT analysis, you look at those threats, you analyze those threats. So now we have to take into consideration, we've had a global economic crisis that shut down something like 450 film and television studios in 2010. So we've got to take that into consideration under our threats. A pandemic, we've now got to take into consideration as a threat. So how do we make ourselves threat protected? How do we create mitigating strategies that address that, as well as our weaknesses? Because when you're honest about the weaknesses, you can start putting in your risk mitigation strategies around that. So SWOT becomes key in that process. So of course, this has a huge impact on the value chain. This has the impact on the value chain because it then starts to put increased costs into your development, increased time, increased resources. And so has an impact on the skills and development that need to be addressed. And then has an impact on the organizations and agencies that fund us. For instance, the National Film and Video Foundation has its marketing and distribution at the end of production. So only after production can you apply for marketing and distribution. In this modern day and age, that's absolutely ridiculous. We have to have marketing starting at a very early stage. So this is where being part of the reference group becomes key in motivating to the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture to initiate that change, to ensure that they move the funding schedules to be upfront with development. And then we need to analyze the IDC. How can IDC come on board to adding support to developing these business skills? Because IDC is key about a business plan. So they become a key partner in addressing some of these gaps in education and training that we're experiencing. And, you know, as animationists say, we then can analyze the entire ecosystem that this touches, and how do we ensure that all the players are modifying to address this so that we can have much more stronger business models and business plans that come out of this. And I think a case can be made for even creating a funding schedule at the NFVF for IP strategy and design, of which we've made a motivation for that. So, you know, when we start to talk about licensing and merchandising, an extra cost comes in, which is IP protection. And this is why we went about doing the hackathon, because we wanted to look at how do we reduce the costs of trademarks and legal costs for animators, gamers, because we have so many assets that the cost becomes quite intense for a small little SMME to take on if they want to really extract value from their licensing and merchandising. And so, you know, implementing the solution from the hackathon becomes a key intervention to opening that door to reducing that cost so that we can get more ROI from our L&M. So yeah, IP protection becomes really critical in the licensing and merchandising. I wanted to give a case study at this point around an animation that is online that is doing phenomenally well. But let me just check time. I think I'll add it on at the end if we want to do a case study on an unhappy husband and the potential in the mobile economy and what we could be extracting from the mobile economy. So I'll add that on in the end if we have extra time. So, so yeah, as I said before, incubators become a really great place to be able to address some of these skills problems for SMEs because they are already in business. And so we put the interventions in place on the projects that they're actually working on. So we're really looking at how do we increase the opportunities to become more creative in our approach and innovative in the design in order to minimize risk and increase ROI. So moving on to gaps in career advancement, this is another critical area where we have massive lack of professional training for advancing your careers in animation and especially for producers. This lack is creating a big block to the growth and success of our industry. For a professional animator, you know, who's moving from a junior animator to becoming a medium animator to becoming a senior animator, there isn't a proper career path and certification process for that. So it doesn't give them that power to be able to use that certificate to negotiate for higher salaries when they go to their next job, saying, I have moved and I am a certified medium level animator. So these become key interventions that we put in place to help our animators on their career path. I mean, currently you can do it online, but you have to pay in US dollars, in pounds, in euros, and that's a huge barrier for a junior level animator. And of course, producer training. Oh man, I cannot stress the critical importance of producer training. Executive producer training is that business stuff, is that core stuff. And if we put in courses and education processes for this, we can start attracting entrepreneurs, real entrepreneurs from other disciplines who'd like to come into our industry, and they're not necessarily animators or have those skills, but they have the love for the medium, the love for the industry, and they want to use their entrepreneurial skills. So having a place where people can train to become executive producers and producers opens up a whole new door for growth for the industry. So we've started engaging with government around that and talking to them about using some of the FET colleges that are sitting vacant and developing spaces for animation and gaming and professional training in those spaces. So I'm going to move into some of the critical and scarce skill shortages that we're experiencing in the animation industry. So with the support of GIZ, we were able to do market research. It's intra-market research, so I won't go into it in too much detail. And some of the critical skills that were identified, producer was top of the list, animatic editor, concept artist, storyboard artist, and then in the scarce skills, we're looking at 2D animated to digital, storyboard artists. So this means storyboard artists are both critical and scarce skill. 3D animators, 2D animator cutout. So in knowing this information, it then empowers our constituents to design their career paths around meeting the needs where the gaps are, which increases their employability. And this is where putting in those professionals courses becomes critical, because somebody who's perhaps a modeler and rigger and wants to add animating onto that can then take a professionals animating course to improve those skills and increase his potential for employment. So Kanda put a really interesting title on my talk, and was Transform Yourself, which I really liked, because I think when we talk about transformation, we forget that the most critical part of transformation is the transformation of the self. And, you know, if we do not do the internal work, and we do not look at what within ourselves needs to be transformed, we're not going to have much success with the transformation that needs to take place on the external. And that self-transformation is not a racial thing, it's a people thing. It's about all of us looking at how do we transform ourselves. And from transforming ourselves on a professional level, on a spiritual level, on a physical level, on multiple levels. And that transformation starts to broaden our perspective and open our minds. You know, there's so much opportunity within Animation SA to volunteer, to come in and look at, you know, for instance, our social impact. Young people who are just animators going to schools and speaking about the careers in animation. Because one of the things that I identified from my research was that young kids at school, at animation schools, especially Black and Indian kids, had to fight tooth and nail to get their parents to fund their education in animation. And we must, you know, take our hats off to our first investors, which is our parents who invest in our education. But these kids didn't have the knowledge, the information to be able to make a strong case that this is a viable career. They will be able to pay their bills. They will be able to buy a house one day. So, you know, it becomes important that our constituents go out and adopt a school and do career talks on career days at various schools and make kids aware of the beautiful world of animation and the possibilities in there. Because I think we're losing a lot of talented Black kids and Indian kids just because parents are just not willing to take the risk. So, you know, that's one example. In looking at these critical and scarce skills, you know, creating groups under Animation SA, which are like the producers group, the animators group, the riggers group, the storyboarders group. And so in those groups, we're able to do peer learning. You can use Animation SA as your platform to fundraise for that, to allow for the development of your disciplines in the various parts of the production value chain. So, you know, as we brainstorm on all the different things, it just becomes so apparent how much needs to be done. And so volunteerism becomes a really important process in us advancing our industry, growing our industry, and helping each other to grow. And so I really want to make a strong case for volunteering and engaging with your industry organization. And an argument I've always made and that we're always struggling with is, if we had our industry organization staffed and funded, so fundraising becomes a key component of that. So if anybody has fundraising skills, even if you're just willing to write the proposals to, you know, whatever time you can make available, it's invaluable in terms of the shift that it helps for the industry. So I really want to motivate for your involvement in the industry. How are we doing on time, Kanda?
We're good. Yes, carry on.
Okay, so maybe I'll bring in the case study. So one of the things that came up in the reference group, the value chain reference group, was the mobile economy. And unfortunately, we were under a really tight deadline and I didn't get to research it in the depth that I would have liked to. But with the little bit of research that I did do, it really is an untapped area that we as South Africans are not exploiting to its fullest extent. And I think I'd like to talk about, you know, Unhappy Husband. One, because here is a young animator who just started and did it himself. He did self-funded, loaded his animation onto YouTube, and is now over 1 million views of his animation. And this is a key thing to mention. It was with adult animation. It's not even with kiddie animation. So many years ago, when I spoke to SABC around what are the numbers for adult animation, and it was doing abysmally bad on broadcast. And so hence you didn't see much follow up after The Simpsons, and there was a few others that played. And apparently the numbers weren't high enough. And when they researched into the market, they found that especially Black audiences didn't see the need for animation, for an adult to watch animation. But now the game has completely changed. We have millennials. Yay to the millennials. I love them. I have such hope for you. Yeah, the Generation Z. We're really looking forward to what you're going to bring to the party. So we've got this whole new breed of young adults who love watching animation, and being adults does not stop them from watching animation. So there's this whole new market of producing animation for adults. So Do from Do Studios was, very ahead of his time when he came up with this quite a few years ago. And the great thing about Unhappy Husband was that he was able to not only just get adult animation, African audiences, but to also touch on an issue that is so critical in our society. In South Africa, we come from a big broken family system, from the apartheid, the mining system, the migrant worker, so forth, that there's a lot of issues within the family dynamic that need repair. And he did it in the most brilliant, satirical way of just through the mind of a husband and his thought process around his family dynamic. It is hilarious. His target market is so on point. He's got the language thing down pat. He's got the colloquialisms, which just make it so rich and authentic. So for me, he really represents somebody who has cracked and broken through on his own, using that mobile platform to penetrate his audience and get access to his audience. And so he's also a case study in terms of how, without having a great licensing and merchandising strategy, you're unable to really extract the full value on that. I would love to get him on working on his licensing and merchandising strategy, because I see such potential of what he could do with those colloquialisms and those little funny statements. And they could be used in so many different creative ways. And then also even his marketing, his transmedia marketing, it has no strong presence across the board. But can you imagine if he had that incredible transmedia strategy, if he had that licensing and merchandising, it just opens up a whole new avenue of revenue. I heard rumors that he's earning really great money from the numbers that he's at now. I mean, over 1 million views. I think the last I checked, it was 1.3 million views. And that's really impressive for a small independent SME that just did it on his own, self-funded, and just made it happen. And there are quite a few of them now that are coming up, which are really doing some amazing stuff. So I think the potential out there is just so huge. There's just such great issues and such great satirical topics that we could capture in our society, and so much great content for youth and African folktales. And as our speaker yesterday termed the coin, folk gore, African folk gore, which I love. I'm like, yeah, I can't wait to see African folk gore. So, with all of that there that we have sitting there, it's like, if we develop the skills, get the training in place, put the processes in place, the world is our oyster. The world is waiting for our content. The rest of Africa is waiting for our content. I know they have a love-hate relationship with us, but we have something special that we could offer. And we just need to get our systems, our processes, our training, our standards up. We've got so much. I mean, we produce such great quality animation. So now it's just addressing the numbers of people so that we can produce much more animation. And most importantly, to open the doors for all of that money that is just like passing us, going to other countries, outsourced work that could be coming to us. And so when we start addressing things like professional advancement, we're starting to increase the numbers of high-level animators. And once we've got that big bank of high-level animators, we can pitch for any outsourced work in the world. And that starts to increase job creation, giving our animators platforms for getting more experience. And then we start to really, have a foot in on various other culture stories. I mean, if we look at what the Vfx industry is doing, they get to work on some of the biggest VFX films around the world. And most people don't even know this. We're just silently working on, Ken, I'm sure you know them, you live in Cape Town, they're always working on really big brands. So yeah, I think, that's an unknown kind of area of the animation industry that we need to open the doors wider and go, we could be doing so much more. We could be really servicing the rest of the world. And that opens the door for us to be able to create our Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings kind of high level, big budget stuff that requires that kind of high level animating, high level special effects. If we look at some of our authors like Credo Mutua, can you imagine when In Double My Children comes alive in animation and VFX? It's going to be phenomenal. So, you know, there's so much exciting content out there that we want to work on, that if we get the skills development, education, and training right, it's just going to be a fantastical industry to be part of. So I think we can move to questions now.
Thanks so much, Isabelle. It's always inspiring talking to you. You've had so much experience in this industry, and so nice to know that you're still full of excitement and love for animators and animation and training. So in terms of the big picture that you've painted so beautifully, we have a lot of work to do. There's, I mean, I think if there are any educators watching, it's not only education in animation, it's education in all the other disciplines that come into it, and the commercial opportunities that are available in, like you said, in the licensing and marketing space, in developing ancillary products, in developing products and services around IP. What advice would you give to any educators out there who are wanting to know more about our space and how it works?
Yeah, I think the time is right for us to start encouraging the educators to start engaging with the industry organization, Animation SA, because they are part of our constituents as well. And so I think there's a lot of work that we could be doing jointly that benefits them and that benefits the industry. And at the end of the day, for us, it's about how do we ensure that our industry grows and that we put in interventions that improve the industry. So definitely want to encourage educators to come and engage with us and look at some of these areas that we've made motivations to government to put in support. We're designing the 5-year strategy with the Department of Arts, Sports and Culture and the other audiovisual members. So once those are implemented, we will need the help from various educators to come on board and help us with developing these programs. Curriculum needs to be designed for all of this. So yeah, partnering, and I think that was part of the thinking in moving the organization from an NGO to an NPC so that we can be way more robust and able to partner with various stakeholders to implement different opportunities. And then this also opens up the door for cross-pollination of benefits to the educators in the organization, where the organization can also earn an income from that. So we've got to start looking at how do we as an organization become self-sustainable and move away from purely volunteer-driven and start getting staffed up. Because I think once it's staffed up, we really will be able to make a greater impact.
So this morning we were lucky enough to have some media strategists in our workshop session, and they started talking to us about the fact that we need to, as an industry, also start to market the career possibilities and the opportunities that are out there, and come together in a more kind of consolidated way to allow people to understand what sort of careers are out there. There's a comment that's come in on Facebook. It's not easy convincing parents to fund studies in animation but there's still people in their teens and early 20s who don't know what an animator is. So it also calls, I think, for a lot of collaboration in terms of marketing the industry itself and what the industry can do. Would you like to speak to that?
Sorry, repeat the question. I was reading while you were talking.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's I'm asking you to comment on the comment that's just come in from Facebook about how a lot of young people, even in their teens and early 20s, don't really understand what opportunities are there and how they can turn their passion for animation and gaming into a meaningful and lucrative career.
Well, this is why, thanks to GIZ, we were able to start beefing up our website, which is an exciting new development that will launch soon. And so from our website, we can start to offer those kinds of information and start to offer a lot more and make the website way more robust in terms of its impact for our industry. Things like offering human resources support, of creating a portal where people can show when they're unemployed and when they're employed. And you click to their link that shows their work and their experience. So just looking at different ways that we can communicate more with the industry and people interested in joining the industry. So yeah, creating a portal of information that empowers parents, empowers teachers, empowers the youth to know that this is an important industry. And if you're passionate about it, please don't become an accountant or a doctor or a lawyer. Push through, fight for your arts. The arts is critical in times of crisis, especially like now. We look at people stuck at home and what are they doing? They're watching content. We are those content creators. So it really becomes important that we attract as many talented, amazing, gifted people to join our industry, and especially people from outside our industry to also come in and look at this as a business to run. That, yeah, they are the strong people, but we've got to strengthen up those business skills. So yeah, definitely communications needs to be improved. So there will be a start with the new website coming soon. I can't give a date of when it will launch. These things take time, but it's coming.
Thanks. I see there's another question here. For African storytellers, will there be support to hone their craft in future? And great search for them, mostly to educate communities?
Well, yes, this is why I want to motivate for the separation of skills and development and transformation, and separating social impact and human capital innovation, because I think there's a massive space with social impact where we can start engaging with rural communities, township communities, doing road shows and screenings, because so many of them don't have access to our work. It's so much short animations that are done. I did a call out to the rest of Africa for a short film festival, for the Fagugezi Festival, a short film competition that we ran. And I had 2 hours of content. So many people just don't have access to that. So, you know, we screen them in the festival space and we try to bring in kids from townships to come and do viewings, although some of it was a little too adult for kids. But yeah, the social impact unit allows us to start looking at how do we start to adopt a community and have studios go into those communities and do drawing classes and do screenings and have talks and go into the schools and educate teachers and principals and students about animation as a career. So yeah, I really want to look at separating social impact and innovation from the skills development and transformation. But to never forget that in skills development and transformation, innovation is key, because we're sitting at this really exciting, innovating time where anything's possible. It's like, just experiment, just do things differently. Look at how we can do things in a new, fresh, faster, more impactful way. So yeah, definitely there's huge scope and opportunity. The world market has opened up to appreciating African stories. The beauty of being left behind for so long is now when the world gets a little taste of what Africa has to offer visually, culturally, creatively, it's just new and fresh and mind-blowing. The way we are blown away by just all this Korean content. I'm loving Korean content right now. Teens are going crazy over Korean content. So it's just because they were locked out for so long, we didn't have access to them. So Africa, it's the same thing. Once we get those skills up and we keep the quality just constantly improving, we will be able to access those massive markets out there that just haven't had the chance to see African content. So yeah, keep developing your stories, keep honing your script writing skills. I cannot stress the importance of script. It's so critical. We must once we crack excellent script, I am totally confident with our animating and technical skills in South Africa. It's just a numbers game. But script is one of our areas that I feel needs greater work, and a lot of training needs to be put into that. Fortunately, Netflix has allocated a fund for the audiovisual industry in South Africa on skills development training. I think it's $10 million. And so we are engaging with them to look at, because I did ask them, does that include animation? Because you'll be amazed at on how many platforms I sit and they speak audiovisual industry and they're not really meaning animation. So I constantly have to push, like, is animation included in that? And she was like, yes, animation is very close to our hearts. We love the medium and we think that there's huge scope and potential in Africa for that. So they're definitely keen on coming on board to support and help with that. They're currently working with Triggerfish on developing some programs in training. So yeah, as animationists say, we're also going to be roping them in to help with developing some of the key areas in our industry.
I think, Isabelle, we really are, everyone at Animation SA knows how much you do to push those doors open for us, and everyone who knows how much you do is extraordinarily grateful. There's another comment come through around the training framework, the sort of administrative framework in South Africa, about how long it takes to get courses approved and accepted into the syllabi. I know you've been working on some ideas around mentorship to deal with that. Do you care to discuss that?
So in the reference group under the skills development and training unit, we worked with all the different groups around designing interventions for all of the key areas that are blocking growth in this area. So SAQA and the processes of SAQA that need to be addressed, CETA and the issues around CETA that need to be addressed. So these are issues that have been brought to the Department of Arts and Culture and is part of the master plan in addressing some of that. But yes, it is an academic process. It is a long process. It is a painful process, and hence the importance of working with academics and partnerships with different educators, because they come with those skills that we simply do not have. And we need to start forging partnerships to start breaking those doors down and ensuring that we get that created for our industry. What was the other question? It was around mentorships.
Yes.
Mentorships, yeah. So I had a really amazing opportunity to have a few workshops with Professor Barry. Now I'm going to be challenged with his surname, Blawski, something like that. Oh my God, I hope he has a sense of humor. But I really admire him. What a brilliant brain. He is the brainchild of Tumologong Digital Innovation Precinct. And so when we were talking around mentorships and we got to unpack, just the various issues around mentorship, what does it take to be a mentor? Can anybody be a mentor? How do you design a mentorship program? How do you get mentors ready? What are the do's and don'ts and dangers in mentorship? because, you know, there is toxic mentorship as well. You know, people, and hence the thing of transform thyself, because the stuff that you have can come across to the other person and you can break another person's spirit. So, you know, working on the self and working on your mentorship abilities becomes key. And that means, you know, looking at how do I communicate with people? How do I share information? Am I open to sharing, or am I fearful that, oh, you're going to take my job one day? You know, all of those kind of self-transformation, broadening your mindset around the power of giving and how that comes back in so many beautiful ways. And to live in a fearful construct that, you know, you're going to lose your job to, you know, another race, is really a fearful mindset that is very archaic and needs to shift. And that comes from self-transformation. I think everyone who is at any level of the production cycle, from junior to medium to senior, we all need to start preparing ourselves to mentor, because the each one teach one process, the peer learning process, is critical to an industry growth. Because this is not just about myself and my job, my studio, it's about our industry and how much more we could get if we broadened the talent base, if we shared more, if we opened up more, we just will get more. So I think there's a big shift that needs to happen to start making people realize that mentorship is a critical component. How many senior animators were mentored by somebody who was there before them and took them to the level that they are? So mentorship is a very important process, and I highly recommend that everybody look at their potential to mentor. So yeah, we do need to create a program for people who want to become mentors, who aren't natural self-mentorship type people, and design a program where people can go through. And I think it's something we could even do for online, that you take an online course to become a mentor. And then also that links into train the trainer. So, you know, so many experienced and top level animators are sitting out there with all these amazing skills. And if we put trainer training in place and they are equipped with that trainer abilities, it then starts to help us address some of these problems. So that is one of the things we're looking at with our funders in getting a train the trainer program put in place. We did one in 2019. We sort of in the pilot phase with GIZ, with Jeannie Vati, who is a trainer at Tshimologong, the internship that I created for Tshimologong. And she is just such an amazing teacher. And she said that that process really helped her go to the next level and to understand things about adult learning that she didn't know, and understanding the dynamics, the class dynamics, that you might come from a certain class level. And so your perspective of people is from that class level. But when you've been trained to understand the different, having a different perspective on the different classes and backgrounds that people come from, you can be more compassionate and more understanding in how you deal with different people from different classes. So, you know, train the trainer is a really important intervention that I believe we need to push every single year. We've got to be training new trainers in the industry. And that opens the door for professional learning. And so we start to have the skills base in which to start putting those professional courses in place. I mean, I remember in my studio, so when we were doing the internship, we would take, once we had discovered everybody's skills level and they'd been working on the projects, you know, they had studied animation, they're professional, educated animators, but then we take the top rigger to do a high-end masterclass on speed, you know, I call it long division versus short division. Like doing the short division rigging from his years of experience, how he's learned to manipulate it and be more effective, be faster, produce higher quality, find tricks and things. And so he was able to impart that on them, and bam, all those years of learning they got to get in a very short space of time. So it's just such a powerful way of helping your studio and your industry grow by doing that mentorship and training of your peers.
Thanks, Isabelle. We've had another question come through around whether lectures like these talks that we're having now, I presume, can become available to schools and academic institutions and for students, and giving them more information about what the industry offers. I'd like to speak to that a little bit because these stakeholder engagements have been funded by the Goethe-Institut platform. And we are talking to them about how we can potentially roll that out and create products and services like this. But these sessions are being recorded, and you can reach out to any of us and get a copy, or figure out how to get a copy. And we'll make an effort to try and figure out how to put them online and make them available. Again, it speaks to having a shared resource hub, which the start will be our website that Isabelle mentioned that we will launch later on in the year, and coming back to that platform regularly to see what kind of resources can be available. But I imagine, Isabelle, there's lots of other resources that you've earmarked for sharing.
I've been speaking to provincial government around, how do we start to access resources that are existing, like libraries. Libraries have computers in them. So can we ensure that this content gets put out into libraries across the townships? I mean, initially we want to pilot in Gauteng, but ultimately this must go to libraries across the country. I know in the reference group, Kevin had made the recommendation for film clubs to be created in schools, that it becomes an extracurricular in every school, that film clubs are created, so that there's a platform for places, kids to be able to do research, have access to information, and so forth. So yeah, engaging, because just doing stuff online really gives a limited access, and we're not able to access, the more further reaches of our country. But if we start to use and leverage the existing resources, the community centers that have computers and so forth. So it's just about ensuring that we get onto all of those platforms.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Isabelle. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, as always.
It's been awesome.
Is there anything you want to say in closing?
No, I think in closing, I just want to reiterate the issue on volunteerism, and to always remember that there's so much that you learn by giving your time to an NGO and an industry organization. And industry organizations are the places in which we take control of our industry. We start to design a way forward and find solutions for the problems that we're experiencing. So when we take ownership, we get power from that. And there's a lot of power that comes from being able to define and design solutions and ways forward. So even if it's to come together and do a brainstorm on one issue, if you recommend a hackathon, that was an amazing experience. Let's do more hackathons. So, just looking for creative ways to find solutions for our industry. I want to encourage people to come on board, volunteer, get involved, be the change you want to see.
Thank you so much. And I also want to say thank you so much to our sponsors, Goethe-Institut and Cloud Platform, and the team at Animation SA for bringing us the opportunity to speak to you all. It's been a long time. It's been a long lockdown. Our animation exchange events and our animation festival have been pushed back quite far into the calendar, and hopefully we'll have some announcements about those soon. Otherwise, if you want to carry on engaging with us this week, we have two networking events, one in Cape Town tomorrow evening at the Electric, and in Johannesburg at Toasted tomorrow evening. Please check out our social media posts for more details, and RSVP, please, because we have to keep the numbers within the COVID restriction regulation things. And on Monday, we will be putting together a forum. We'll be inviting all our speakers back from this week to have a discussion about everything that we've learned this week by engaging with you. And you will have an opportunity again to ask any questions you may have and chat to the panel and discuss them then. So till then, thanks so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.